Good afternoon. The UK book market is booming. Last year, almost 200 million printed books were sold, the fourth consecutive year that sales have increased. Topping the fiction bestseller lists are books from the children's author and comedian David Walliams, British writer Lee Child, who created the character of Jack Reacher, and the American thriller writer of The Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown. But beneath these superstars at the top earning fortunes, there are authors who barely make a living. Income for full-time writers has almost halved since 2005 after adjusting for inflation. And on average, a full-time author earns just over £10,000 a year, according to the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. So if you dream of making it as a writer and repeating the success of Harry Potter's J.K. Rowling or 50 Shades of Grey's E.L. James, this programme is for you, because today is all about the economics of being a writer. With me in the studio, veteran literary agent Karolina Sutton from Curtis Brown. Welcome, Karolina.
Hello, thank you for having me.
No, real pleasure. And you look after some big names, Karolina. Margaret Attwood, who wrote, of course, The Handmaid's Tale.
Absolutely.
And Malala Yousafzai. So what does a literary agent do?
I think essentially a literary agent's role is to help authors realise their potential. And that's both creatively and financially. So we are intermediaries between publishers and authors, but we are also the first port of call for many authors who perhaps have written a few chapters or have an idea for a book. So if you decide to write a book, your first step would be to call a literary agent or to write to a literary agent. That's right. And then we would sit down and we would talk about the best way forward for you, about the best way to realise that idea.
Okay.
And then I would negotiate the terms for you.
Or you might just turn me down straight away.
I might turn you down.
Now, we also have the thriller writer Mark Dawson with us. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Now, your first two books were published in the traditional route, but you've since switched incredibly successfully to self-publishing. And I think I'm correct in saying you've sold 2 million books.
Something along those lines, yeah.
35 different titles.
Yep.
And you describe the move to self-publishing as the best money decision you've ever made. Why?
Well, I was traditionally published, as you said, in the start of my career, and had a generous advance, around about 50,000 for a couple of books. But those books didn't sell particularly well, and also, spoiler alert, they're not very good. I had two strikes on my name, and I couldn't get another deal for a third book. So it was only when I realised the potential of things like the Kindle and being able to reach readers directly that I got back into writing again. And since then, as you say, it's been an extremely successful financial decision. I'm a full-time author now. I have a enviable life, I suppose, and basically get paid to do what I love to do.
OK, Mark, we're Moneybox. We want the figures. How much did you make last year?
It was north of 7 figures last year.
Over $1 million?
Yes.
You are the self-publishing success story.
I'm one of them. It would probably be fair to say I am an outlier, but I teach other authors as well, and we have dozens of authors who are making, well, in fact, more than that. We have authors who are making enough to fill their petrol, fill the car with petrol, and on the other hand, to go full-time and to bring in 3 or 4, 5 or 6 figures a month sometimes. So it is a remarkable opportunity that's available to all.
You are our hope, Mark. Well, that's our panel. You can, of course, call us now on Moneybox Live with your questions and comments. Our phone number is 03700 100 444. Geographic charges from landlines and mobiles apply, or our email address is moneybox@bbc.co.uk. And our first question is from Sarah Jane from High Wycombe. Hello, Sarah Jane.
Hello.
Hello. Now, I hope you don't mind me giving out your age, but you're 50, and
yes, I am.
And you're thinking of starting as a creative writer. Why?
I'm just at that point in my life when I have always wanted to do it, and I haven't had the time, based, family requirements or whatever. But it's time for me to start doing what I really want to do, which is to write. And it's just knowing how to start, really. OK,
well, stay with the Sarah Jane and let's hear from an author already published, Ros Barber. She's had 2 books published, received an advance of £75,000 for her first novel, The Marlowe Papers, which did win a number of literary awards, only advanced £5,000 for her second book, Devotion, and she relies on her job as a university lecturer. But still, I suggested to Ros that a £75,000 advance didn't sound too bad.
It was a fantastic amount of money and I was extremely pleased. And it's an unusual amount of money to get, especially for a first novel. But it was 4 years' work. So it was paid over an extra 2 years. So it stretched over 6 years, essentially. So in essence, it earned me £12,500 a year. And that's before the agent's commission and also tax. So it's considerably less than that. I'd also got into quite a lot of debt in order to write the novel. So it really wasn't such a generous reward as it might have at first seemed.
Can I be brutal, Ros?
Yeah.
And suggest, why don't you just write a bit faster?
Yeah, I wish I could. I mean, I think perhaps it's easier to write faster if you're writing genre fiction.
Romances or whatever.
Unfortunately, literary fiction does sometimes take time. I mean, certainly there are quite a lot of famous, great novels that were written very quickly, but there were also things that took a very long time. I mean, Donna Tartt took 10 years, I think, to write Goldfinch.
And I think Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol within weeks, didn't he? But then there was a lot of financial pressures on him to do so.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, that was the popular fiction of the day.
So that's your first book. What happened with your second book?
The second books don't get as much as the first book if the first book hasn't become a bestseller. And the way for literary fiction to become a bestseller is it pretty much has to get shortlisted for the Man Booker or win the Orange or the Bailey's Prize. And that's when you kick into big sales.
So you would sell, 5,000 copies, but if you win, you sell 100,000. I mean, is it that sort of difference?
Yes, it is that kind of difference. And actually 5,000 would be a very generous sales figure for literary fiction, especially from an unknown, a debut novelist.
So cover price of both your books in paperback, about £9. How much of that do you actually get, Ros?
Okay, so if you buy the book directly from me, I'll get £4.50 because I can buy my own books from my publisher at 50% discount. If you buy this book from an independent bookshop, I'll get 67p. If you buy it from a large chain bookshop, I'll get somewhere between 40 and 67p, depending on how big the discount has been negotiated. If you buy from Amazon at that price, not at a discounted price, I'll get 40p. If you buy it at a lower price, obviously I'll get less.
So how much less?
10 or 20p, yes.
What about a library, if I borrow it from the library?
If you buy it from a library, I will get, at current rates this year, 8.5p per borrow.
So that's author Ros Barber. Sarah Jane, you're still with us. What's your reaction to Ros's story?
Well, I mean, it's quite shocking to hear how little she gets actually for selling her fiction, and obviously she puts so much work into it. It's a little disheartening, to be honest.
Well, do you what? Keep listening. Oh, hang on. Mark wants to give you hope.
Let me give you hope. So the alternative way of doing it yourself and self-publishing, if you priced your book at, say, $4.99 or $5.99, Amazon will give you 70% of the cover price. So most of my books are around about $4.99. I get $3.80 every time I sell one. So it then that adds up quite quickly.
Well, Sarah Jane, keep listening. We may have some guidance for you. So.
Thank you.
Real pleasure. Ross says she sold about 7,000 books across the two titles. £9 a book. That's only talking total sales of 60-odd thousand pounds. Literary fiction, Karolina, is not going to make you wealthy. So we're pretty commercially minded at Moneybox. What genres are there money to be made from?
I think literary fiction is quite unpredictable. You can make a lot of money from literary fiction, but there is no pattern. So there are writers who have made millions from literary fiction, and they have audiences that follow them over the years and decades. It's quite rare. The genres where the patterns are much more predictable are series, romance, crime and thriller, science fiction, fantasy, saga, because you can build a community of readers and you can keep going to the same readers whose expectations are similar for every book. And I think there's a degree of formula and they are happy with the formula.
Another big seller of last year, still selling well, Michelle Obama's memoir, Becoming, sold 500,000 copies in the UK in just the first 2 months of sales. And in fact, it's thought that Obama's advance is the largest ever in publishing history. I think something like $65 million, though we don't know, do we? And that's a book from both the president and his wife. And this brings out a couple of emails we've had from our listeners. Email from listener Jordan Cooper, who says, traditional publishing is greatly restricted to already established authors and the rich and famous because they are safe and guaranteed to sell. Is that a fair criticism of your industry, Karolina?
I think this is such an exception. It's such an unusual example that we really shouldn't be taking it as a point of our discussion, and it's not a model for anyone. And in fact, if you look at the bestseller list over the last few years, the authors who have sold millions of copies, both in the UK and abroad, have been debut authors.
In the UK, it's...
So in the UK right now, in the non-fiction charts, it's Adam Kay. Then the Runaway. This is going to hurt.
Diaries of a Junior Doctor.
Absolutely. And Adam Kay came up from performances, from shows, comedy shows. And he was a first-time author, and he created his own audience. We have had authors, first-time authors of thrillers. We have had authors of general fiction, from the Runaway bestseller, Eleanor Oliphant, to Elizabeth is Missing, to fantastic debut authors who truly came out of nowhere from creative writing courses or just submitting a manuscript to an agent. The one thing I wanted to add to the whole ecosystem of publishing and sales is that the UK or English language sales are only a small component of what we do, and a small component of the rights management that we offer as agents. And increasingly, we make authors a lot of money in markets like film and audio. Okay.
In Ross's interview, she explains she gets less money from Amazon and she thinks that's damaging authors' income. Well, Mark, you sell pretty much all your books on Amazon and you made £1 million last year. So what makes it financially viable?
Well, we touched on it. The 70% royalty is fairly attractive. And I don't see Amazon as destroying the publishing industry. In fact, I see it as quite the opposite. Amazon is opening up new markets and new ways to reach hundreds of thousands, millions of new readers. I think it's an extremely exciting time to be a writer, and you can pursue a traditional deal if you want, or you can do it yourself. I'm agnostic about how my stories reach my readers. I just want them to reach my readers.
And we've had an email from self-published author Ian Moore, who writes under the name Bruce Beckham. And he says, a key point I would make is that while the most recent survey by the Publishers Association quotes the proportion of industry income that reaches authors as a mere 3%, by comparison, Amazon gives its self-published authors 70% of turnover. The much maligned would-be monopolist is actually extraordinarily generous. I had a couple of points here. Dr. Chris Pearson's got in touch with us. He's written 3 novels, on the 4th one now, from North Yorkshire. He said it's very hard to get into an industry if you're not already known. And we've also had Simon Scarrow get in touch. And I'm sure, Simon, I've read some of your books. Very excited that you got in touch with Moneybox. Successful author of historical fiction. He has some advice. The best advice I ever got was never to give up the day job until you have 5 books under your belt and your writing income is twice what the day job pays. Bernard Cornwell told me that, and he knows a thing or two about writing as a career. Thank you very much, Simon. Let's go now to another Moneybox listener. Rick is on the line. Hello, Rick.
Hello there.
Hello. No, you're writing a thriller.
I am writing a thriller, yes, which is a big challenge for me, but I'm just really looking forward to getting into it and getting it out there.
Well, the good news is thrillers sell well, so commercially you've hit the right place. In a sentence, what's it about?
In a sentence, it's a recovering soldier who's had a brain injury overseas, an explosion, comes back, has huge communication issues, and meets up with a music therapist who basically gets him to communicate. And as he begins to communicate again, a mystery is revealed. A
mystery is revealed, right. And you want to know whether to self-publish or approach a publisher?
Yes, really. It's I've done a small book of poetry which I self-published, which was not as painful an experience as I thought it would be. And that has been really good. So okay. I was quite enthused by that. But again, it's just really some advice as to where I would go now, whether it is a case of self-publishing or whether it's better to go through a free agent, straight to a publisher. What would be the best way forward?
Right, stay on the line, Rick. Karolina.
I think you need to ask yourself a question of what you want out of the experience. Do you care about having a beautiful physical object. So if you walk into Waterstones or WH Smith's, you will see it front of store. Or do you just care about reaching readers? And I don't know whether we are supposed to be adversarial in this conversation, but I see self-publishing as adjacent to traditional publishing and not at all exclusive. I get a lot of letters and emails every year from authors who tried self-publishing and didn't enjoy it. It's a business, and I just think it's actually I'm in awe of authors who run their businesses and self-publish. It takes a lot of effort and work and resource, dedicated to that undertaking, and usually it's directly, your success is directly proportionate to the time and effort that you put into it.
But of course, the problem is, for a first-time author, is getting the attention of people like you, Karolina.
Not really. I mean, we read all submissions we receive. So I think it's very easy to submit material, and we spend most of our time reading and responding.
I think that's an opportunity for you there, Rick. Mark, sell Rick on self-publishing.
I would say, Rick, they don't need to be mutually exclusive. One really good tactic would be to self-publish it. Deploy what you've learned already. If it starts to sell, you will find agents notice. I've been approached by agents all the time asking whether I'd be interested in selling my John Milton books. And just one final point, and we're not going to be adversarial at all, but often you will hear people saying self-publishing is vanity publishing. I think actually having the desire to have an object in a store, that's vanity these days. For me, my objective is to pay my mortgage. I don't really mind whether my book is front of house in Waterstones. I just want to reach as many readers as I can, and that's the way to do it.
But one of the criticisms of self-publishing is quality control. So what do you do to make sure your books look indistinguishable from something that the publishers produce?
Very important. First of all, when is the last time you read a traditionally published book that didn't have a typo in it? I remember Tracy Chevalier's excellent book, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, was spelt incorrectly on the cover. Earring had one R and not two. So Dumbledore, I've seen misspelt. For me, I approach it extremely professionally. I have my cover designer has done covers for John le Carré and Stephen King. I have a copy editor. She reviews the manuscript. I then pass it to a team of what I call advanced readers all around the world who will pick up typos that slip through the editorial process and also correct the factual mistakes that I've made. And there's a whole different conversation there. And then it gets proofread to make sure I haven't introduced new errors during the editorial process. When that book has effectively been crowdsourced, it's been professionally edited and then crowd edited, when it goes live, I'm as confident as I can be that it doesn't have any mistakes.
And on marketing, we've got more from the self-published author Ian Moore. He emailed us and he writes about the importance of a self-publisher to market your book. And he says he's got, write for an established audience, a commercially viable segment. And he says he writes for US audience because 67% of Amazon's customers live in the States. And he knows exactly who he's writing for. So he says, my reader is 55-year-old Darlene, who lives in Las Vegas with grown-up kids, a husband in the entertainment industry, and her hobbies are quilting and her pet Alsatian. Is it that? Do you take it quite that far, Mark?
No. He sounds ideal for self-publishing. That's the customer avatar that he's created there, and he can write to that avatar now. You don't need to go to that kind of length. I certainly don't go to that kind of length. And one thing I would say for people who are thinking about one way or the other, you do need to be at least... you need to be prepared to do the marketing and to do the business side of things. And if the idea of that brings you out in hives, then you almost certainly should look to a traditional publisher because that is what they will do for you. But, saying that it's not difficult, it's not complicated. I'm not a technical genius. I'm not some kind of computer science whiz. If I can do it, I think most people can do it.
We've had an email from Catherine in Stoke-on-Trent, and she says, please spare a thought for non-fiction writers. Rarely any royalties, poor flat fees, no reprint fees, a minuscule number of agents interested because their cut would be too low. So continual touting is required. However, having said that, she says, I do love it. I'm now nearly 65 and will retire in July. I would have phoned you, but I have 50,000 words to write by April the 1st. So good luck with that, Catherine. Becky Fernley is now joining us from Reading. Becky, hello.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to Moneybox Live.
Thank you.
Now, you have a bit of pedigree here, don't you, Becky? Because you have a degree in English and creative writing.
Yes.
And you've already had a poetry collection published in 2017. And I read this online. It sounds lovely. An octopus who dreams of stars, a self-important fisherman who gets what's coming to him, and a misunderstood monster. Octopus medicine contains all these. The stories call us down into an octopus world where days are dark, everything's out to eat you, and nothing's what it seems. The octopus has much to teach us all. It sounds amazing, Becky, but how many poetry books did you actually sell?
Not very many. I don't think I've sold... Well, it's done okay. I don't think I've sold more than about 150 myself, and then I'm not sure how many my publishers have sold. But it's sort of modest for poetry, but then poetry isn't very lucrative anyway. So
it's not for commercial reasons. So
no.
Okay, so what do you want to ask the panel?
So I'm a poet, but I'm sort of just in the process of finishing my first young adult book, and I would like to get an agent, I think, just because I'm not a very good business person and I don't think I'd be very good at self-promotion. But one of the things I struggle with is finding time to earn enough money and also finding time to write. So much of my writing time is done on trains on my way to jobs. And so I think my question would be, is there a good way to try and make money or kind of make writing part of what you do in order to give yourself enough time to write before you sort of manage to make it, or unless you manage to make any money from it?
I think that's a great question. And I think a lot of writers struggle with time and finding time, particularly time where you can focus. I would say a lot of writers teach. And I think that the important thing is to find the time when your brain really functions at full capacity, because you don't want to be writing when you're tired after a full day's work. And, publishing, writing, journalism, although that's not that lucrative these days. But I would have said that poetry was not lucrative. Maybe if you asked me in 2015, but recently in the last few years, we've seen this extraordinary emergence of Instagram poets, and they're making millions from poetry collections. I don't know whether that's something you'd be interested in, but there are so many.
Becky, have you done that? Instagram poets?
A little, not a lot. I'm quite wordy.
Different kind of poetry.
Oh, listen, Becky. Now, Mark, I'm sure, would say self-publish, but we have a third way. And to explain it in more detail, we have Stevyn Colgan on the line. Hello, Stephen.
Hello.
Now,
how are you?
Very well. Thank you for joining us. Now, I've got your book, actually, A Murder to Die For, in front of me. And you've published books through the traditional route, but you've now gone to a website called unbound.co.uk. How does it work?
Well, it's basically resurrecting a model that has existed for as long as publishing's existed. It's basically public subscription, for want of a better phrase. It's a hybrid between traditional publishing and crowdfunding. What happens is you submit your book, or your agent submits a book to Unbound. You have gatekeepers, commissioners who look at it and say, yes, we like it or we don't. If they take it on board, they then create a web page on the site with usually a little movie to support it, and then you go out to raise the money to get the book published. And then once that total is reached, it switches back to traditional publishing again, and you get structural editor, and you get a copy editor, and proofreader, and a designer, and distribution, and all the things you'd normally expect.
So it's almost like GoFundMe for the advance, and then a sort of publisher.
It kind of is. Like I said, it's an old model. I mean, Dickens published a lot of his books through subscription. Dr. Johnson's dictionary, the first dictionary, was done through public subscription. It's exactly the same as traditional publishing, except that it's the public basically saying, we want to read this book and paying up front, instead of a publisher having to take a punt on it and gambling whether the book's going to sell well or not.
Now, I've got a list of the supporters, which is all the people that have backed you, that's given you, I think it's £10. Was it £10?
Well, there are different levels that you can set. That's the other nice thing about
But
this.
one is Dalectus Tweeticus, and I believe that person said they paid extra to get the name Dalectus Tweeticus in the book. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the levels I set for the book is that if people paid X amount of money, they could actually name one of the characters in the book. and most of the names were fairly straightforward, and it was great fun. But then I have one which came in from this guy where he wanted a character called Ray Dalek Cat. which is a bit tricky when you're trying to write a comedy murder mystery novel. But I managed. There is a scene in the middle of the book where there's a press conference, and I managed to put a character called Ray Dalek Cat in the press conference, wearing a tinfoil hat, saying, "Are aliens involved? Is it an abduction?" And it actually added another joke to the book.
Anything for the cash, Stephen? Anything for the cash?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, in the new book, I've actually got a level where you can win me for a day.
I'll win you for a day?
Yeah, so I'll write you a speech, or I'll come and mow your lawn, or whatever. It's whatever you have to do to sell a book.
OK, now, it has to be said, though, you do write for the TV show QI. You have a recommendation on the back cover from the comedian Stephen Fry. Sandy Toksvig has written a recommendation as well. That is quite a big advantage.
It is, or I should say it was, because I don't work on QI anymore. Yeah, it is an advantage, but I'd also point out that it's not beyond the realms of possibility to get those kind of recommendations anyway. The other one that's on the back there is from the guy who plays Barnaby in Midsummer Murders. I'm a big fan of the show, and I contacted him through Twitter, sent a copy to his agent, he read it and he liked it. So, Neil Dudgeon gave me a cover quote. OK,
Becky, are you still with us, Becky?
I am, hello.
Does that sound of interest?
It's all of interest. It's all something to try, isn't it? Just to see if you can get it out there. So. All
right. Well, Becky, thank you for joining us. And Stevyn Colgan, thank you very much for joining us as well.
You're welcome.
Real pleasure. What about audiobooks? Another source of revenue? It's something that you do, Mark.
I do, yes. I have deals with Audible Studios directly, and I know they did a promotion on one of my Milton books last week, and it was #1 in the UK store for a couple of days. So that's another income stream.
Karolina?
I think audio, it's just been an amazing success story in recent years in the UK and abroad. We're just seeing it's actually the only sector of the business that is really growing. And that goes for original material, audiobooks, podcasts. There are authors we represent, and particularly in the States, who make more money from podcasts, and they're very successful authors, than from books.
OK, we've had a couple of emails. One from Donna Baker, who writes, I've written 80 books, last novels written under the name Lillian Harry, published by Orion and Sunday Times bestseller list. And she said, for a long time I did very well and was able to provide myself with pensions. But in the last few years, like many other authors, I have found my advances diminishing to a sum at which they became no longer a livable salary. She says, I really don't know how authors trying to make their way today can hope to earn a living. And then we've had a slightly more upbeat email from the end from Carol. And she said, I've written 7 books, 6 commissioned non-fiction and 1 fiction, historical drama called All Changed, published last year. Should you need a job to pay the bills, but writing novels or any other book is such a pleasure and such fun and fascinating. And she writes, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm writing my second novel based on my journalism career as a restaurant critic, a thriller, and boy, is it fun to write. So Carol reminding us all that work isn't just about the money. That's all we have time for. My thanks to thriller writer Mark Dawson, literary agent Karolina Sutton, and of course, thank you all for your calls and your emails. You can always take a look at our Moneybox website. Moneybox is back at noon on Saturday. Goodbye.